Alright guys, welcome. This is Nozman here and I'm bringing you another Thoughshift video. It's been a while. I've been really busy with exams, but now I'm back to produce some content. And if you don't know what we are talking here, we mostly discuss a specific legacy deck, which is a combo deck based on Thought Lash and Paradigm Shift. If you're interested, you can check the write-ups. I will link them in the description. And we also have a Discord server if you're interested in joining the conversation. Also, facecam now. The way I want this to play out is basically we are going to discuss a little bit of new printing since I didn't make any video since Cold Time. And we just have to check what's going on with the meta, the new cards that have been released, and how they can interact with the deck. So let's start with Strix 7. We have a couple of options. So the first card I want to discuss is basically this one. It's Serpentine Curve. I will barely mention this just because, it's not good enough, obviously. But I have to point out that these soft combos with Thought Lash and Paradigm Shift, because you exiling your own library means that the body's going to be big. So it's a sorcery for 4 mana that makes a fractal token with a body equal to the number of instant and sorcery in exile and graveyard, which means realistically this can be a very big creature considering that you are exiling the whole deck. But this is generally bad because you will die to blockers, you will die to death touch, removals, decays, maze of it. So I just mentioned this for the sake of information, but let's move on to the better cards. Next up, we have obviously a card that you already know, of course, because Delver has been using it since a while, and is Expressive Iteration. For 2 mana, it makes you exile 3 cards from the top of your library. You can play one until the end of turn, get one in hand, and put another one on the bottom. Now, the point here is that we have to make a distinction based on the type of shell that we are playing, because you can play this deck in 2 ways. You can play it as a cantrip based combo, much like Storm or Show and Tell, or a Stompy based combo. So leveraging Ancient Tombs, Chalice of the Voice, and all the stuff. You can also check up the Traven U channel from Phil Gallagher, because he had a donation about the Stompy mono blue version for the deck. It's been quite funny watching him. And so, what's the difference here? Well, basically, if you play cantrips, you're gonna be playing fetches. That makes Paradigm Shift worse because fetches do not interact well with it, generally, aside from some exceptions. But you're also gonna be playing cheaper spells like Brainstorm and Ponders, which means the exile cards can be quite easy to cast. And that's why Expressive Iteration can be good in that specific situation. Instead, if you're playing a Stompy approach, you don't play much shuffle effect. Like if you're splashing, because here we are discussing blue-red splash, most of the times you're going to be playing 4 to 5 shuffle effects, and you're going to be fixing the mana in other ways. So that means that the bottom of your library actually matters, because if you track every card that you put in any position on the bottom of your library, as soon as you solve a Thought Lash, and you didn't shuffle, of course, you have access to all those cards. Well, that means that if I play Expressive Iteration and I see a Thought Lash, a land, and a Thassa Oracle, for example, I can put the Thassa Oracle on bottom, play the land, and as soon as Thought Lash resolves, I can just have access to the third card that in theory you wouldn't have access to playing Expressive Iteration. So that's something to consider it. There are a lot of reasons to play red, and I think this card can be pretty good. The only issue is that if you play in a Stompy shell, you're not gonna have easy time fixing your mana with cantrips, like if you do instead playing Brainstorm and Ponders. Moving on, and still staying in red, we have Lailia, the Blade Reforged, aka Riven from League of Legends in Magic the Gathering. This card is pretty interesting, I like it. It's basically a 2/2 body for 3 mana with haste that soft combos with Thought Lash, basically, because the last effect says whenever you exile 1 or more cards from your library and or your graveyard, you get to put a +1/+ counter on Lailia, which means that if you have Thought Lash down, you just can untap, play the hasty creature, and I don't know, exile like 18 cards and beat for little with a sneaky hasty attack. But the problem is obviously that this card doesn't combo with Paradigm Shift, because it's gonna just trigger once with your Paradigm Shift. Just keep that in mind. But the good point here is that the second effect says whenever Lailia the Blade Reforged attacks, exile the top card of your library, and you may play that card this turn. Well, this means that this actually makes a sort of soft card advantage tool. It's basically an hybrid between an Arcanist effect and a Dark Confidant effect. Let's say worse than both, but in general, you will have a growing body that beats for a higher amount of damage each turns. That generates also card advantage. So I think this is pretty cool. Also interacts well with any other mechanism of exiling that you have in the deck, such as Shadow Isles or Expressive Iteration, indeed. So I think that this could be an option worth exploring in the future. But I think this is probably better in Stompy Shell, because you can play an Ancient Tomb and power up this card early on. Moving on, we are closing Streak 7. Let's move on to Modern Horizons 2. And of course, we have the new, Delver toy, which is Ragavan, Nimble Pilfer. And you basically probably know what this card does already. It says whenever it attacks and deals combat damage to players, you get to create a treasure token and exile the top card of his library and play it until the end of turn, and also as a dash cost. The thing to note here is that you can actually play this card in a obviously non-stompy version, in a cantrip version, and take a little bit more of a like combo/tempo approach, where your pieces generate card advantage. You can play Ragavan, you can play Lailia, you can play what's called the Forager, the whale that also enables Paradigm Shift, and all these cards provide card advantage when beating down, while also doing some decent cheap damage. One thing to note is that Ragavan generates treasures, which emulates the role of Lotus Petal without getting higher count in the graveyard. That's pretty important. Your treasure will not add extra count for your Paradigm Shift. So I think, and also, have some card advantage when exiling the top card of opponent library. So you can exile maybe a Daze or any counter spell and use it as protection yourself to land your Thought Lash and stuff. Also, one thing to note, do not underestimate the amount of damage this card can output, especially alongside with Lailia, for example. If you go like turn 1 Ragavan, turn 2 Pedal into Lailia, which, by the way, you will be replacing the Pedal once Ragavan hits, that's like 5 damage beating down on turn 2, which escalates into 6 then 7 on turn 4, for a total of 18 damage. Just add in the mix like a Shadow Kyle or a Bolt or any exiling mechanism, and you have a little combat damage in 4 turns, which is pretty impressive, if I have to say. And they also generate card advantage in the meantime. So I think it might be interesting to try to take like this kind of approach, like playing maybe Bolt, Forager, Expressive Iteration, and Ragavan in a cantrip-based list. Might be an interesting thing to do in the future. So I will probably test this out, but I have more interesting stuff going on. So let's move on. And we also have next another Delver card, of course, which is Mercenary Regent. Now, this is basically the better version of Tombstalkers that came out with Modern Horizon. It's for 7 mana at 3/3, which has Delve, which means you're gonna be exiling cards for your Paradigm Shift to work in the late game. Has flying, and it gets a +1/+1 counter for each instant and sorcery that you delved. But also says whenever instant or sorcery leaves your graveyard, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on Mercenary Regent. Now, why I think this card is interesting? Well, it generally dodges a lot of hate for creatures such as Fatal Push, Bolt, Prismatic Ending now, Abrupt Decay, but it enables Paradigm Shift while providing a huge body. I tested in the past on lists with Gurmaganglers, but this is way better. And also, one thing to note, if your graveyard gets fat enough, like if you play I don't know, cantrips, dazes. You trade resources with your opponent, and you paradigm shift into the late game. You get Murktide Regent to be way bigger. Like you can easily pump this from a 5/5 to a 10/10 or stuff like that, which means like if you have a Task Oracle, you can play like this double game. Like you just say paradigm shift in the later stages of the game with like this 4 body, 5/5 body, and just say, okay, I'm gonna to play this Task Oracle soon enough if you don't die to this giant flying body yet. So just remember that this might be an option. I already listed a shell playing an very funny, I think a very funny approach. Basically, that list was playing Dazes, Delver of Secrets, and the Murktide Regent, and Forager as creatures. And the rest of the list was basically a blue-red Delver deck with 4 paradigm shifts. So I thought about playing a sort of twin approach where you go in tempo then combo, mostly because the combo is cheap. Like it's like the smoke combo. It has a downside of the risk that you're exiling your own library, but I think it's more resilient than the smoke combo because it doesn't die to a removal. So that will be a interesting and fun thing to test. But moving on, we have the most interesting card in the deck to me, which is Endurance. Boy, I love this card. Basically, you probably already know, okay, but this is a 3 body for 1 mana and 2 green, a 3/4 sorry body that has flash, reach, and when it enters the battlefield, you get to shuffle back a graveyard of target player into his library, and there's an evoke cost by exiling a green card from your hand. Now, this card is pretty awesome, and I think I will be testing soon a list with an extra green count to play specifically this creature, and why I say so. First of all, it's a great body for 3 mana. It blocks Delver, it blocks Channeler, it blocks a lot of annoying stuff, and there's a flash, so you can just play it in the opponent's turn to have that sort of sneak blocker. Delver deck might have to trade 2 for 1 to beat this card, and it also provides a sort of like net's advantage because you get to shuffle your graveyard back in your library, and this is pretty crucial if you're playing Prime Shift because having a lower count is very important to enable it, and you get to do this for free. Like against like non-blue decks, you can realistically evoke this on turn like 2, then play Paradigm Shift for 1 because you can stack your triggers in such a way that Endurance does the trick, then gets into the graveyard, and then play Paradigm Shift without only 1 card left in your library, which is Endurance itself, and then playing Task Oracle. Also, same in the later stages of the game. I think this card is pretty great with Paradigm Shift and is worth exploring. And the list that I made, you will basically we will see it soon enough. Is based on an extra green count, so it's playing more Icebound Coatls, Uros, Sylvan Libraries, and also I'm testing Gleaming Wishes to get extra copies of Thassa Oracle in the deck and some silver bullets in the sideboard, which also comprehend Endurance itself. So I think this card is really great, helps a lot in some creature-based matchup as a sort of blocker slash removal. Does a lot of tricks, interacts with graveyard like aiding, I don't know, Loam decks, Hogak, Dredge, Reanimator, all of the unfair stuff. And as some utility, like if you have to protect yourself against surgical extraction in a really niche situation, you can do that just by the fact that you're playing Endurance. So yeah, not much else to say about this card. It's pretty great. I love it, and I will be testing it soon. Next up, we have Prismatic Ending. And basically, this card is already seen playing in the control list. But I think this card has an important role for the blue-white Stompy version of this deck, of the Thought Lash Paradigm Shift decks, that used to play Chalice of the Void and white for Teferi, the 3 mana Teferi. And you had this kind of situation where you had to stick to playing Swords to Plowshare in the sideboard, but it was a nombo with Chalice of the Void, of course. So like you could like take out some chalices and keep some swords in, like moving some swords in, but it was still like a little bit of tension between those. But now that you have Prismatic Ending, then that's even better if you're playing Ancient Tombs and the other mana ramps in the blue-white approach and a stompy approach of the deck. So I think this card is pretty interesting, especially for those kind of lists. And it's very flexible, it's versatile, and also Teferi enables instant speed, Prismatic Ending, other than Paradigm Shift, of course. So I would highly advise exploring this card maybe in the sideboard if you don't have enough space in the main deck for the blue-white Stompy lists. Last, we have just a brief mention of another broken card, which is Urza Saga. So Urza Saga is basically what's breaking the format right now. It says it's both a saga, an enchantment, and a land, and says whenever you get put the trigger, you have another different ability. You have on the as enters the battlefield, you get to add colorless mana. Then it gains the probably the best ability to create for 2 mana and tapping a 0/0 construct that gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. And on the last trigger, you get to tutor an artifact with mana cost 0 or 1, exactly 0, 1. And so I think this card could be interesting, but it would take the deck would take another like approach. You could probably play like a Stompy list, a blue Stompy list, playing Urza Saga, tutoring Retrofit Foundry to grind, but also Relic of Progenitus to get to enable Paradigm Shift, and maybe even playing some cards, Great Creators, that also tutors the what's called the leveler. Yeah, just going for the spice there. So I think this card is pretty busted by himself, so might just be a generally good card that you can add to your list to make it more consistent. But it has also the upside to to the Lotus Petal or the Relic of Progenitus or Tormod Script, depending if you don't want to be too much into your own Chalices of the Void, the Retrofit Foundry to generate blockers and stuff. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. Next up, you will be seeing me playing probably a blue-green list based on the fact that I wanna test endurance. That's basically my best pick between all these cards. But I have a lot of spice going on since right now I should have more free time to dedicate myself into Magic the Gathering. Also, will be playing in FNMs to test my spicy lists. And that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.